All right, let's get started. Welcome to Sports Innovation Lab's Ask Me Anything series. My name is Shanna McCardle. I am the Director of Events for Sports Innovation Lab. We're thrilled to welcome Sam Lee with Sina Sports as our guest today. I will get into his introduction in just a moment, but just a few quick reminders. If you have not been able to join us for all of our past AMAs, we have all recordings posted on our website and our YouTube channel. So I will make sure to share that link with you in the chat. As you can see, we've had an incredible lineup of guests. So if you've missed any, I highly recommend that you look those up. Quick reminder, please join our Slack community if you haven't already done so. It's really easy to join. You just click on this link. I will make sure that you have this link as well. And this is an Ask Me Anything, so we want to hear from you. Please type your questions in the question window, which is right on the right side of your screen. Please feel free to ask your question at any time throughout the hour, and Josh will ask that question when it's appropriate. And now, speaking of Josh, you all know Josh Walker as our president and co-founder of the Sports Innovation Lab. He will be leading our conversation today. And now on to our guest, Sam Lee with Sina Sports. Sam has over 10 years of experience in the traditional sports industry, having served as vice president of the NBA and currently is head of international business strategy for Sina Sports. Sam's personal investment portfolio includes over 20 startups, several of which have gone on to raise over $150 million cumulatively. Sam also serves as mentor and advisor for a few of the most selective accelerators, including Stadia Ventures, Startup Bootcamp, and Hype Innovation. So with that, welcome to Sam, and I will pass it over to Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Shanna. Good morning, Sam.
How are you, Josh?
I'm doing well. You are in New Zealand, of all places.
Yes, and thank you for accommodating to do this late afternoon East Coast.
You're the one who had to get up early. I'm not accommodating anything. I appreciate you doing that.
8 a.m. here as we enjoy the last bit of winter here in New Zealand as we head into the summer. I'm pretty excited. It'll be my first summer here in New Zealand.
Okay, so I asked you what the drink of choice is in the evening time, and you told me that you're staring at a vineyard and there's some wine in the region. But what do you drink in the morning? Is it tea, coffee? What do you wake up to?
Yeah, very big coffee culture, a little bit similar to Australia. Flat whites, what they call long black, which is just sort of like Americano. But yeah, very, very big coffee culture. And I love the cafes here. You know, you go there, get a nice pastry, but we're still in a sort of a lockdown. We are in what's called level 2, and can't wait till we get to level 1. But as you guys probably know, I mean, New Zealand's done a tremendous job. I mean, we're still in this level, even though I think cumulatively over the last 2 weeks, we've had maybe 10 cases. In the
entire country.
In the entire country. And they're tracking everybody. They know exactly who they are. But it's, I mean, that conservativeness, I mean, that's what's kind of won the war here. So hopefully another week, and then we'll be out of this second mini lockdown. And then, I mean, we had about 3 months where everything was just completely back to normal.
Well, let's start there, because I do think again, your background gives us plenty to talk about. We're going to talk about the NBA, we're going to talk about Sina, we're going to talk about your new VC fund. I want to talk about all those things, but I do think that we started the AMA series largely because we were trying to help people understand what was going on, largely around sort of how COVID was impacting the sports industry, not only in the US, but globally. A lot of our clients had properties and sponsorship and media rights in different regions. Tell me what it was like coming out of it. I know that you're back in lockdown and there's no sort of like light at the end of the tunnel in terms of this health crisis. Nobody's saying it's over, but you guys did have a few months of normalcy, or what appeared to be normalcy, in New Zealand. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, I mean,
from a sports perspective in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about New Zealand and China, actually, right? So from New Zealand's perspective, it was back to normal for about 3 months, where we went to lockdown very early on, I think in, April,
right.
May. And then so it was about altogether maybe a 2-month lockdown, but there were levels again. So there was a kind of the really strict one for maybe about a month, and then we came down a level, so it was a little bit easier. And then it was just all, gloves off. So no masks, no social distancing, a lot of hand sanitizers, but that's about it. And so we had that for 3 months. And so the rugby stadiums were completely packed. And
did they go from 0 to 60 in terms of like capacity, or did they phase fans back in?
Yeah, so the level, that's the phasing. So I think level 2. So level 4 just means everybody stays at home. Level 3 is pretty much that. Level 2 means you can go but you cannot have crowds larger than 100. And then level 1 just means everything's back to normal. So at that level 2, we were not hosting any events. But at level 1, then it was complete. There was no social distancing at all. Because New Zealand is somewhat easy in terms of this this pandemic, in terms of the solution for it. Obviously the government has done a tremendous job, but the fact that there's 5 million population, that you have basically 2 islands, and then you can effectively close down the border by shutting down air travel. That makes it very easy, in the sense that, hey, once you eliminate the disease, the virus from within, and then you stop all traveling, so no virus is coming in, then that's effectively gone, right? So that was the strategy that was taken. And funny enough, the reason why we ended up in the second sort of mini lockdown was not due to a person-to-person infection. It was actually it was the cold storage company. So an employee at a cold storage company caught this virus, and they think that it was actually because so apparently the virus likes the cold, and it was a frozen storage container that came in from the U.S. And then the virus was just living on that for the entire time of the shipment. And then when it got here, and then somebody touched the shipment, and we caught it.
If that's true, and I know that I've read that as well, in terms of just like that's just horrifying as we enter in the colder months here in the U.S. That it could do that and travel that way and live on the surface like that. When you guys started having rugby matches, did you guys go right back to full capacity at the stadiums, or did they try to do what the NFL is doing with some of the matches here, and some of the college football stadiums, where they operate at like 25% capacity? They keep large areas of the stadium open. Did they just say no, we're good now, we can let everybody back in?
Yeah, so basically at level 1, that's what happened, because at level 2, it means no gathering of more than 100
so
people.
You couldn't have anybody in the stadium.
You couldn't run it anyway. Yeah, so it's not like baseball game, you have 11 people on each, or 15 people on each side, and you just run it, right? Yeah. But here, just the 2 teams plus some broadcast folks and film crew, that puts you over 100 already. So you couldn't do it. So you could practice and all that, and then you just couldn't do them. So at level 1, you could definitely do it. And then we're seeing the same thing in China as well. So as you guys know, China is pretty much in the same situation, and so they are now back to normal. I know the Chinese Soccer League and then the Basketball Association are talking about putting fans back in, but they're even more cautious than here, so they haven't even done that. But they could if they wanted to, just because there's not any virus at this point either. But that's a much bigger population, so the chances of and has some frozen salmon that came in, and someone got infected on that again. So there was a sort of a mini one there as well.
That's crazy. All right, let's shift gears. I'd love to talk a little bit more about sort of where you got your start with the NBA. Tell everybody very briefly what your role was at the NBA, what your job and responsibilities entailed, and then we can sort of dive a little bit into sort of how you did your job there, because I think that's not a perspective we get often on our AMA. So I would love to dive into that a little bit deeper.
Sure. To go back a little bit, I always wanted to be in the sports or entertainment industries. And I think when I was in college, so I was economics and then computer engineering double major. So just doing a lot of things, and I grew up in Silicon Valley, so it's kind of like, hey, you should do computer science. But I really enjoyed economics. And when I looked around to say, hey, what's next? I said, well, I really want to be in sports entertainment, and I went to UCLA for undergrad, so living in that kind of Los Angeles entertainment movie star world. And I said, well, how do these people become sports execs or entertainment execs, right? And then so you look at the biography of these people, and they're all lawyers. literally like, 80% of them, right? And I said, well, that seems like a good way to go. And so the more I explored, and then I said, hey, that looks like a nice route. So I applied to law school, and then started my career in LA. So I actually did some externships in the entertainment industry. I worked for the Screen Actors Guild. I worked for a music video production company that literally started music videos. So they were around when MTV first started. They shot Nirvana's first video. They were Nirvana's good friends, I guess, with a camera. So then they just said, hey, why don't you shoot our video? So they literally shot Smell Like Teen Spirit and put it on MTV. And now they're one of the biggest music video companies. Yeah, and then started my career in LA, and really didn't know how to break into the industry. They're both very small niche industries when you consider kind of the landscape. And then kind of got lucky. I had a partner that I interviewed with, but ended up not going to his firm. But I guess I left an impression with him because they were working with the U.S. Olympic Committee, and I loved it, and I really wanted to do it. I talked to multiple people there, and in the end, I just decided to go with a different firm. But as luck will have it, that partner that I left an impression on ended up at the NBA. And so later on, there was an opening, and I applied, and the rest is history, I guess, is how they say it. So worked with him, and I was working out of the Beijing, Hong Kong office, also in New York as well. So sort of a pretty expansive role, and I was in the legal department there. So working on negotiation and drafting agreements and compliance issues across a whole spectrum, of the MBA business. So,
what was the majority of your work? I mean, I know as a lawyer you get thrown different things, but were you doing largely media deals? Were you doing athlete deals? Were you doing team franchise deals? Where was your bulk of your work?
Yeah, so there's not with the league. There's not so much athletes. There's not so much relationship with the team, because the team of relationship, that's all.
Even at the international level, Sam. Like, I mean, what is like? How does the international? Again, this is the part that our clients really don't get to hear that often. What does the international business look like that's different than the domestic NBA business? Like, what would a project look like over there that would differ very significantly from what happens here?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, from a structural perspective, right? NBA has offices around the world, so Europe, Africa, and in Hong Kong, there's actually an office that covers all of Asia except China. So China is a sort of a special case where there's an NBA China entity that was formed over 10 years ago that basically is a separate entity, and it's a joint venture that the NBA formed along with a few strategic organizations. So Disney is one of them, the China Merchant Bank, Legend Holdings, and these minority shareholders have a say in that business, right? And so it's a separate entity, and that entity gets to operate autonomously within the region of China. So all of the rights that the NBA has, when you're talking about broadcast, sponsorship, licensing, all of those rights belong to NBA China. So the China office is able to run a lot of that on their own. And sponsorship is obviously one of probably the biggest commercial drivers there, and then broadcasting as well. And then there's licensing and gaming and other.
How is that structurally set up? Is it an LLC? Is it a C corp? What's the entity look like? Is it how did they take investment into that? Was it private equity?
Yeah, so there was a prospectus, and there was kind of a round that went around back in I think 2007, 2008, where that was done. So can't really get into kind of the structure or any of that, but it's a pretty standard way of doing things in the banking world.
In the banking world. Okay. So that venture set up, you're in the US. Is your job to go over and spend a significant amount of time in Asia, or are you doing back and forth? How's that work?
Yeah, so I was actually located mostly out of the Beijing office.
Okay.
So I was spending the majority of my time over there at that point. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and while you're there, is there a difference in the way that you think that sports was operating and making its way into the country and creating fandom that normally we don't think about in the U.S. sports market?
I think the way that the NBA and other leagues operated, they operate in the same way that you would around the world. But the thing is, obviously, every market have their local, flavors, right? And so certain things that you have to adapt. But overall, I think the mentality and the strategy is coming directly from New York, so it's very much a global focus type, strategy. But you have to adapt, like I said, to local things. So certain things are done differently. Earlier before the chat, we were talking about Pinterest and the fact that Pinterest doesn't exist in China. There's not an equivalent of Pinterest in China. So obviously you can't say, hey, our strategy in the US is to do something on Pinterest. Well, we can't do that in China, or you can't do that in markets where things don't exist. So you obviously have to adapt quite a lot to the local market, and NBA has done I think definitely the best job out of any league in the world, right? And a lot of times the localization means you have to have people on the ground to be able to help you, to give you that local expertise, right? So for NBA China, when I was there, we had over 100 employees in Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong. Now I think is even more, right? And if you look at that compared to the other leagues, the European leagues as well, I mean, nobody has that kind of manpower on the ground. So it makes it really difficult to really go in depth and try to build as much as you can in a particular region.
So when did you transition to Sina and Weibo and, the role you're in now?
Yeah, so that was about 6 years ago. So I was at the NBA for about 3 years. Like I said, I was working on digital media, broadcasting, the streaming deals. I was working on partnerships, sponsorships. So I knew the Sina and Weibo guys pretty well. And so I was approached by the chairman and their COO to join them. And it was a very interesting proposition. And it took a long time for me to decide. I mean, obviously, it's one thing to work for an American company in China, and there's another whole other thing to work for a Chinese company. And so I think definitely kind of took my time in deciding whether that was a good move or not. But it's been a tremendous experience. I mean, I think there's been a lot of confidence giving me to kind of just let me go and explore and do what I would like to do and take the business in different ways. So my title now is officially head of international business strategy. Actually, when I first joined, it was head of content acquisition. And the reason is at that point, we owned a lot of the media rights for live events all around the world. So at that time, NBA was a live rights partner. Now we own the highlights on our social media platform on Weibo, but we don't have the live rights anymore. We had Champions League, we had EPL, we had NFL, we had a lot of the rights from around the world. And right when I joined is when there was sort of a very large increase in the media rights fees all around all of the sports properties. Some of the sports properties went up 5 times in media rights fees. Some of them went up 100 times in media rights fees. And Sina is a company that's been around for 20 years. We just celebrated our 20-year anniversary of listing on NASDAQ. So it's not one of your fast-growing, VC-backed startups. So we don't have that type of money to be able to compete with some of these guys. Just from a P&L perspective, you can't all of a sudden blow $100 million on a media right when you can't. I mean, it's impossible to recover that. I mean, that's sort of the situation right now. But we're seeing that come down a little bit. If you see just in the last couple weeks in the news that the Premier League had to cancel their deal and take a deal with much less money. And that's because it was just inflated so much over the last 5 years. So my roles, changed from that content acquisition guy to a much more expansive role of just head of international. And we have 3 lines of business at Sina Sports. The first one is that website digital media business, which we've been in for the last 25 years. So it's, very similar to Yahoo Sports. But like I said, we've been doing live streaming since the early 2000s. So it's actually sort of a pioneer in that field. And we still have over 150 reporters and editorial team staff covering all different sporting events and editorial and all of that as well. So that's sort of our first line of business, and we still have some live rights. We're the longest partner for the Masters in China. We do European golf. We do some PGA Tour as well. So focusing on some of the niche markets, just because soccer and basketball, which are the two most popular sports, the rights fees are just too high. Our second line of business, is a company that we incubated from within Sina over 10 years ago, and that's Weibo. So Weibo is one of the three main open social media platforms in China. The other two being WeChat and TikTok, or Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok. We started off as a sort of a clone to Twitter, but we've since grown into sort of a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram hybrid. If you scroll through our newsfeed, I mean, it looks very much like a Facebook one. That's got about 500 million monthly active users, over 200 million daily active users. So that's really a tool for anybody to reach a very large public audience in the way that Facebook does that, right? So TikTok obviously does it from a short form video, and WeChat is much more of a closed communication type tool. And so with that, we manage all of the sports vertical, so all of the sports accounts and content that's on that platform. We manage it, and so that in terms of international relationships, that's leagues, teams, owners, agents, athletes, brands, media that we have on there. So it's opened up, a great network, in terms of who I get to talk to on a regular basis. And our third line of business, I actually helped co-create after I joined, which is an offline events business. So the analogy here would be ESPN creating the X Games brand about 30 years ago. So we've done that now 3 times within the last 5 years. We have it is the world's largest 3-on-3 basketball tournament. So 3-on-3 is now a official event in the Olympics. So we started that right when I joined, and now last year we played in over 180 cities in China with over 200,000 participants. So it's an amateur tournament, but once we get to the national level, you're looking at very much the guys that would possibly represent China in the Olympics. And then we put an international tournament on top of that we invite some of the best players in FIBA to come and join us in China. So that tournament is, sort of a preview of the Olympics in the last couple of years. I mean, the team that won from the U.S., the point guard on that team is on Team USA, who's going to try to qualify for the Olympics. So that's pretty exciting. And that little tournament, we've taken that, and I've sold the media rights to that internationally to over 30 countries. We had ESPN down here broadcasting it in Australia and New Zealand. We have Fox Sports in Southeast Asia, and we had a whole host of broadcasters worldwide. So that was that's probably the most interesting part of my job right now. It's just because that's we started that from scratch, like I said, and now it's a pretty sizable part of our revenue in terms of our business. So that's
again, it's one of the reasons I wanted you on here. I don't think people have visibility into sort of how that's certainly grown on the Sina side of things, but it also intersects with FIBA and the Olympics on, now that it's an official sport. So I have just a personal question because I'm curious. Culturally, do Chinese sports fans talk trash? Like, is it acceptable? Do they do it? Do they use Weibo as a platform to have sort of that banter back and forth, or is it more of the publishers pushing out to them the content that's approved, or is there like a subculture of like, hey, I know I should be Bill Belichick, do they feel like they have that sort of stat knowledge?
I think that's pretty universal. I mean, I think they do it in different ways, but I think it's pretty universal. I think
what's unique about it is that, again, I plead complete ignorance here. It's like, it's very typical to go online, you get Reddit and Bleacher Report and all these places where, the Sunday chatter with all these Monday morning quarterbacks of like how smart they are about what the Chiefs should be doing against the Dolphins is pretty well understood. And baseball, same idea, right? Everybody thinks they're Billy Bean and Moneyball. But like in China, is there something that like percolates in the fan community where somebody has really captured that zeitgeist of like what fans care about or how they behave?
I would say that it's more personal, meaning that they're not as deep into the technical aspects, right? Like some of the stuff I read on baseball, it just blows my mind. Like someone can sit around and write an article like that's 5,000 words and just like ridiculous. Not that type of like in-depth analysis. That's not really something that people are that keen on, just because I feel like it's to most people it's still sort of a casual thing, but they like to feel closer to the athletes. They like to feel closer to their teams. So
what about fantasy sports, Sam? Fantasy sports has fantasy sports, DraftKings and FanDuel kind of thing taken off.
I guess what I mean is like they like to come up with like nicknames for the athletes. They like to like learn more about what they're doing off the field. It just like they want to feel like closer from almost like a friend, just that's what I mean by personal. It's just that they want to like, for example, we do a lot of work with Shaq. And so whenever Shaq posts something, there's a lot of, the comments are not about, hey, who do you think is going to win in the, don't analyze the next round, not that kind of stuff. It's a lot of it just about, hey, like bantering, using nicknames and chatting to him. And so I see a lot of that, which is, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but that's just what I see. It's just that very personal, wanting to feel closer, wanting to be, and that's part of the nature of our platform too, is a social media platform. So maybe on certain other places, I mean, there are obviously hardcore community apps and whatnot that people go on and they're literally just talking about the sports, left and right. But for us, because we're a social media platform and people do post things, on like easy athletes posting things on Instagram that gets sent over to us as well about their personal lives. So people tend to be more interested in that, I feel, but at the same time they are talking about the games. But it's just that's the bit of wrinkle that I see quite a bit.
I don't think it's a small thing. I mean, if you look at Yahoo and DraftKings, both clients of ours, thinking about sort of what they've tapped into in the psyche of the fan who thinks that they can pick the right lineup and that they're smarter than their friends, and that competitive nature. Again, I've always been curious as to how well that translates globally. And when you and I were talking about you coming on the AMA, it was very much about like, okay, Sam, like, can you connect the dots between your, NBA experience with your Sina experience with what you're now starting to do with venture capital, which is to figure out what models work well across borders, right? And when I was writing about you joining the AMA on LinkedIn, I thought very much about like, what patterns do you see? And I wanted to ask you this question. It's like, what patterns do you see that you think are universal, that sort of do translate from one culture to another because sports ties that together? Because I do think the experience you just described around Shaq is very different than the way that fans want to engage with sports in the US and certainly in Europe as well.
Yeah, I think that personal level, I mean, that's probably one that I would really pinpoint to. I would say probably 80 to 90% of the comments, if you like something like that, where Shaq posts something, it's about the fans trying to say something to Shaq, right? Wanting to get Shaq's attention, and it's not about sports, in the traditional sense.
So we have a whole line of research we call athlete-driven media, and it really stems from what you see happening around the world with athletes going direct to consumers, right? Through Instagram, they can have a relationship with the fan. Through Twitter, they can talk back to the fan. Through some of the emerging platforms now, they can sell subscriptions and content around their nutrition or what they do to work out and things like that. Is that a huge opportunity in China? Would the consumer follow Shaq's training regimen? Are they looking to him for that type of advice, or is it really just this familiarity and this relationship they're trying to build?
Yeah, so absolutely. So there's the big trend right now is in terms of live shopping. So kind of your home shopping network, but in the digital streaming world, is massive. And there's a lot of athletes.
What's the holiday? It's something 11, right?
Oh, the Double 11. No, that's just e-commerce. That's just Alibaba.
That's just e-commerce. This is Alibaba saying shop now.
Dollars or whatever. Yeah. No, but the live shopping is just someone sitting like we're sitting here, and we could be chatting, and I could say, hey, I'm drinking this water, and this water is great, and then there's a little link, and people just go buy stuff. It's literally like home shopping network.
Yeah,
you're doing it with influencers, you're doing it with celebrities, you're doing it with athletes. And so there's definitely a lot of people jumping on that bandwagon, and there's and the numbers are ridiculous. I mean, there's people who come on and they're because they're influencers or because they're well-known people, and in an hour they could sell like $50 million worth of goods.
Have you seen a corollary to that?
Line up, right, for this, and then you will pay so much money to get on this thing, and the influencer will talk about you for like 5 minutes, and they will show your product, and all of a sudden you made $10 million in revenue.
Yeah, so that's like QVC. But Instagram is more like, hey, I'm going to put a link in my post, or if it's Twitch, it's like, after my stream's over, I'll put a link in my, post or in my feed. Like, what's the closest thing you've seen, in other countries that mirrors that live e-commerce, video chat commerce? And are you looking for deals in that space? Because that seems to me to be something that would be an export from China, not an import.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think there are countries in Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia tends to follow China quite a lot. I mean, India as well, that are trying to do this now because they see that, hey, look, this is a sort of a major trend. We actually did our own Sina, where we invited some athletes and influencers that we know to come in and sell, sporting apparels, because we still have to stick to our core users in terms of what it is that they're looking to buy, or potentially we think that they like to buy, and so that's really kind of where we're at. I mean, it's very different. Again, I think it goes back to the whole personal thing, right? To do on Instagram, put a post, I mean, it seems very impersonal. Whereas if I'm sitting here and I'm just chatting with you, I'm chatting with the audience, and but every once in a while I bring out something, and if it's they're selling like noodles, for example, literally they're cooking it during the show, and then they're eating it right there, right? So and same thing with drinks, same thing with shoes.
It just feels more authentic. Yeah,
but but ultimately it's like home shopping network, but with people that you feel like you're much.
Yeah, but look, man, I think it's one of those things that it blows your mind. We were going to put out a report this month on co-watching. The idea that you can watch together, and there's all these different terms for it. But like, why hasn't that happened? The idea that you and I could be in a different location watching sports together seems to be something I would certainly pay for, because I'm not going to get in the car. It's snowing, and my buddy and I were going to go to the bar, but we're not going to do that now. But I'd still love to watch the game with him. So maybe you charge me a few extra bucks, and I get to do this with him, and the live stream is there. Like, those are the things that like COVID, I think, has brought to the forefront, and certainly made
startups I'm advising is actually in that space. So they're trying to do it with a pure audio solution. With and one of the things that people complain I've seen is that, I'm sure you've seen it too, where the solutions would put the live match on the top of your phone, and then the bottom of your phone are your friends' mugshots, right? But it's bigger than the action itself. Well, that doesn't quite work, because we're all there to watch the game. Well, I'm not there to look at my friend's face.
I don't want to look at my friend's face
the
either.
audio solution kind of is a nice one, because then all you're doing is just listening to people, and you're just chattering. It's the same way that a lot of gamers these days, when they're playing the games, they're talking to their the people on their team about the strategies and whatnot. And you can do the same thing if you're just watching the NBA game, and you're just talking to your friends and making comments whenever there's no action, right? You don't want to be talking over the action. You don't want to take it away. I mean, ultimately, the live experience is still the prime thing for sports fans, right? It's experiencing the live experience. Well, it's just about how to enhance that in ways that don't take away from the experience itself. So,
well, I want to get to Rumble Ventures.
That's kind of taking away from it a little bit.
Yeah, I want to get to Rumble Ventures, which is your new fund, and we'll talk a little bit about the investments that you're looking to make. But before we do that, I want to ask a few of the questions that have come in. One of the questions is about the NBA's success within China, and then the natural question is, what are they doing right that properties like the NHL that are trying to break into the country in a more meaningful way haven't been able to replicate?
That second question, I definitely have some opinion on. That first question is the answer to that is really there's no way around it, which is they were there 30 years ago or 40 years ago. And that's sort of
so David Stern was first. He brought the big names over. He did a good job. Right. The answer to the NHL is they just need to be patient and build the same momentum.
To a certain extent, I think you know, I mean, I know all the leagues that are there in Asia and in China and what they're trying to do, and there are different types of strategies. I mean, I think one that we were talking about before, again, coming back to the personal angle, is to find a local hero, right? What Yao Ming did for China, you know, obviously helped tremendously, but you have to be there on the ground, firstly, right? So NBA was there before Yao Ming was around, but you're there, you're showing your story, you're building, you're being patient, and then you have a local hero that's able to kind of take you over the top. And we're seeing that right now with the UFC a little bit. They've always been, you know, kind of a minor player and not generating. I mean, they had a nice little core group of fans. I mean, for probably 3-4 years ago, they had maybe 250,000 followers on Weibo, and that number jumped to over 1 million. Now I think, I don't know, 2 million now. And it was because, you know, slowly they were building that up, and then all of a sudden they had a few athletes from China. Now the women's champion from China was the first ever, you know, and you have something like that. That breaks the sports barrier. That becomes a general news about, you know, a sporting athlete in China dominating on the world space. So that all of a sudden brings you new fans that you never were able to reach before. But you had to really build that foundation in order to get there, right? I mean, you still had to, it still needed to have enough chatter to break that ceiling. Whereas, you know, if you're the sport that nobody even watches, and then you have a Chinese champion, well, maybe that doesn't resonate. I actually had a conversation yesterday with someone from Africa. In Africa, MMA is not that big. Even though they have African champions, right? Like Israel Adesanya, who's actually now based out of New Zealand, is from Nigeria. But he goes to Nigeria, people don't really know who he is. And that's because that sport didn't really build a foundation. Build a foundation, and then on top, you're adding that local aspect to it. You're building the local stories. I mean, that's really the way to go. And NHL is doing that. You know, they've made a couple events in China.
Lots of youth. Lots of youth investment. Lots of local rinks being built. Let me ask you one more question, then we'll get to your venture, and we can wrap up a little bit here. But we saw really early on with COVID that Korean baseball was doing interesting things around virtual fans and putting interesting fans in the stadium. DFL did some interesting things, Bundesliga, to replicate the fan experience. What has the Chinese market done to either execute a successful virtual event or make it appear that there's a crowd at the venue and make it more exciting?
Yeah.
Has there been anything that sort of stood out as an innovation that worked
like we were talking
well?
About before, the situation was different, right? Because China had the pandemic first. So when it first shut down, I mean, there was a lot of fear and uncertainty. So it wasn't like when the rest of the world kind of had a little more time to prepare to go into the shutdown. So I think you know, at the beginning, everything just shut right down 100%, and there was nothing.
But even now, as they're operating more conservatively, are they still doing anything from a production capability standpoint or virtual events to mitigate some of the risk?
What I've seen is typical with other leagues around the world in terms of you know, fan noises and virtual crowds and stuff like that. Nothing that really stands out to me. And the reason is now, it has to do with the timeline of the pandemic, right? So now everything's pretty much back to normal. So there's no point to continue to try to innovate. I mean, literally could be next week or, you know, during the CBA playoffs, they're talking about putting fans back in the seats. So the timeline, you know, from that perspective, it just wasn't enough time for them to really do a lot. Like that was what I was saying. Like at the beginning of the pandemic, when they shut down, there was so much uncertainty that no one was trying to innovate. and then it was gone, and then now we're back, and then now we're gonna go back to completely normal. So there's just not enough time to really try to do something. Whereas in the States, you're kind of saying, hey, look, I don't even know if the next MLB season, what that's gonna look like. NBA is talking about starting the season in January, right? So you kind of have to innovate and try to find solutions around that, because it's just a prolonged period.
So the connection I want you to make now, because we're coming close to the end here, is the NBA experience plus the Sina experience leads you to be advising over 20 different startups. I don't know how you have time to do any of this. You're connected with a lot of organizations that we really respect. Stadia Ventures, great partner of ours since the beginning of starting the company. We love Art and what he's been able to do there. Tell me a little bit about what are you doing and why? Because I think the investment thesis for your fund is spot on in terms of there's white space here for a group to come in and really focus on international when it comes to sports tech and some of the inventions and innovation we've seen in this space. So with that as sort of a tee up, what is Rumble Ventures?
Yeah, the why is very easy. The why is because I just love sports and the technology that's behind it, and I want to see these innovations grow and be successful and change the way that we watch sports and make it all better. That's very simple. The how is a little bit harder. I've kind of sowed the seed for this for almost 3 years now. I had a good friend of mine who was a serial entrepreneur that reached out to me and asked me to be on his advisory board 3 years ago. I didn't know that it would turn out as successfully as it did. It's a company called Socials and Chili's. It's kind of got two names. They're a blockchain-based fan engagement platform. They're now the official partner for PSG, Barcelona, Juventus, UFC, and then esports with OG and Heretics as well. So they released this fan token concept where fans can either earn or buy these fan tokens, which allow them to make certain decisions on behalf of the team. So the team would allow certain decision making to be given to the fans who have these tokens. So inconsequential things to a certain extent, right? So a celebration song whenever they score a goal for PSG. Barcelona, the poster behind where Messi sits in the locker room, stuff like that. But the fans, of course, it comes back to being personal, right? And you guys
and collecting things like NBA is doing the Top Shot thing where they're turning memorabilia into collectibles, digital collectibles that have the same sort of blockchain credibility to them.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's an emerging space for sure.
Yeah, I mean the technology to bring fans and your term I really like is fluid fan, and what that means is really that no one wants to sit in front of their TV for 3 hours and just watch a game anymore, because that's not really how people behave anymore. So all of the solutions around fan engagement is, well, how do I make fans more fluid, as you guys call it? But how do I get them more engaged? What things can I do to make them feel more personal to me? Ultimately, that's what it all comes down to. So that's that. I did that, and then I was helping out with a couple friends, with their venture as well, and really not taking it seriously. Just doing it on the side because obviously I was traveling quite a lot for my corporate job. And then this year with COVID, since there's no traveling for anyone, and Zoom has made everything a little bit easier. I've been focusing on this venture a little bit more. And like I mentioned earlier, we have about 20 companies now in the portfolio, and I'm investing into some of them as well. And I had a couple partners, a couple folks that came out and reached out to me and said, hey, we're talking about starting a fund. Would you like to help out? And one of the guys is a former colleague of mine from the NBA. He was based out of the Africa office. He worked with Sony down there for the World Cup in South Africa, and then stayed on with the NBA. And I thought they had a really, really good thesis. They were actually very focused on Africa, but then they looked at kind of my background, and then we realized that we mirrored each other in terms of our ideas and experience, but on very different continents and different regions. And so we kind of changed the thesis there a little bit to make it a global VC fund, which is going to look at early stage sports tech And it really, like, talking about Moneyball, the A's are my favorite team, so I love the Moneyball comments, and we're really kind of looking at undervaluation in terms of in two senses, right? Like, one is that there's a lot of startups that are undervalued because of where they're based, right? If you're not based in Silicon Valley, if you're not even New York or London, it's a lot of times it makes fundraising difficult. It makes valuation lower than the rest of the other places. So we think that there's undervaluation there where we could tap into and find startups that may not be based in Silicon Valley, but it's got great tech, great people that we could work with. And then the other one is in terms of undervalued commercialization markets, right? Even if you're based in Silicon Valley, you may not know how to tap into South America or Southeast Asia or Africa, and we could help out with that a lot, because we're building a very good. I mean, we already have great experience in terms of working globally among the partners, but we are building a very good advisory board and a corporate partnership board to be able to really help these startups, whether tapping into these markets or growing these markets through our network and our connections.
Well, like I said at the beginning, and Dorian just asked the same question, your investment thesis, I think, is spot on. I think it's hard. I think everything is in the execution, because the reason Silicon Valley and New York and London get those reputations is because there's deal flow there. So you have to be very lucky or very proactive in reaching those undervalued, geographically dispersed startups. And then you have to get really lucky that they fit the pattern about in terms of commercializing those in the underserved markets, or the areas that just don't see enough investment in new tech. So Africa would be a huge market for this. Certainly China, importing some of those ideas and translating those into the sort of domestic value that you see from your experience there. I think, again, it's like it could be a huge win given the partnership you've aligned with your colleagues there, but also just the investment thesis. I think the time is right for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the scalability. That's a very interesting one, because based here in New Zealand, I mean, I've had some conversations with folks in the startup community here, and what I found that's really interesting is that everyone uses this market as a testing market, right? But the second that they have some traction here, they're off to Silicon Valley. They move their office over there, they get funding over there, and then it becomes scalable worldwide because of what they're able to do over there. But what I think is really interesting is that's where we could build. That's what we're hoping to build, but on a global level, where we, regardless of where the startup is based, we're able to help you, whether in your local market or in a different market. Right, we're able to help you build that traction, and then once you build that traction, hey, you can go to Silicon Valley.
I love it, but it's really hard to find people with skills that have both sports, tech, and geographic, experience. So, again, kudos for you guys putting this together, and we'll be eager to help you along the way, but also very keen to watch how you guys execute. One of the things I like to do before I wrap up is make sure my guests get the last word. So I've been peppering you with questions. I just wanted to let you add anything that I didn't ask, or chime in here at the end.
No, thanks so much for hosting me. I mean, I really enjoy these talks. Like I said, I'm very passionate about sports and technology, and it's always fun to talk about these things. I mean, I can go on for hours about all of this stuff, and the one thing I think that's really interesting that we're seeing is in terms of this geographical or vertical separation, and what that means is for example, the Y Combinator, the latest batch that they had. So they had 200 companies in the batch, and someone wrote an article about this, that out of the 200 companies, there were 8 that mentioned Shopify. Right, you're the Shopify for India, you're the Shopify for real estate. So for a vertical or for a geographical area, and you're really just taking that innovation and you're localizing it, right? Yeah. And this goes back to our conversation in the beginning about what the NBA is doing in China. How is that different than what NBA is doing in New York? And that's where we feel like, hey, there could be a lot of value here, because we know how to do that for certain markets, right? Yeah. And we could take something and Bleacher Report, we could take that and move it somewhere. We could take DraftKings, we could move that somewhere. So that to me seems very, very interesting, and it's definitely a trend that's just happening right now. I mean, you don't have to, and that's the thing, you don't have to get lucky in terms of like finding innovation, right? We talk about Elon Musk. There's not so many Elon Musks in the world, but one thing is if we're able to find that type of undervaluation in terms of a vertical or in terms of a market, we could do a lot with that. And
like I said, I agree. And I think your pattern recognition will know when not to do that too, which could save you a bunch of cash. Sam, it's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate you getting up early, joining me here, and sharing some of your international experience with our audience. So thanks for coming, and take care of yourself, stay safe, and check in with us. Let us know how the fund's going.
will do. Thanks so much, Josh.
All right, be well.
All right,
See
bye.
ya.
Thank you.